Rabbit, rabbit.
Rabbit, rabbit.
Hey, everyone. I'm Amit Parikh, and with me is Dave Orlandi. Dave and I are senior consultants with Quest Software, and we offer up this podcast delivered the first of every month, hence the name, and discuss topics relevant to the IT industry with an emphasis around database performance. Hopefully, everybody's going to have a great new year ahead. I don't carry too many, bold or sort of like emphatic resolutions. But generally speaking, there's always a couple of things that you want to make sure that you do every year, right, as you go in, right? And sometimes that relates to cleaning house. But what about you, Clay? I mean, do you believe in resolutions?
Nothing specific. I think kind of about a general plan for the year and what I'm going to get done this year. And particularly being here in a not so huge house, but a, reasonably sized house on a farm. There are things I say, yeah, okay, I want to get this done this year. I want to get that done. In terms of improvement, like last year I said, well, I want to get a bunch more trees planted. And sure enough, we got a bunch of trees planted this year. So that was a kind of a project. So I have some, overriding sort of projects and things I want to work on during the year. And some get done, some don't, but no real big resolution. Although, the first question there, are you superstitious?
Yeah.
My family is from the South, and so one of our superstitions, if you will, is Hoppin' John. Always eat Hoppin' John on New Year's. Have that. That's black-eyed peas and rice and bacon and stuff for people that aren't from the South. But,
I live in the South, and I actually did not know what that was, but that sounds delicious, actually.
It is. It's really pretty good, and like I say, the tradition is if you eat Hoppin' John on New Year's Day, you'll have a good year.
and there you go. What a nice layup for me with the name of our podcast, having just that. Good luck by saying rabbit, rabbit. And so similar story, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. And I'm with you. I kind of make a to-do list, but in part because I think there is some superstition tied to it, right? If you don't have any kind of resolutions, maybe that's bad luck. So I kind of get a plan together in order for the year as well. So I particularly like the story you shared with me not too long ago about or your mother's quote. Maybe you can finish that for me.
Yeah. Well, we lived in Hawaii for a number of years, and while we were there, Mauna Kea erupted on the Big Island. The lava flow was headed right for a subdivision. People all got together, and the Hawaiian legend is that Madame Pele is the goddess of the volcano, right? And when the volcano erupts, it's because she's angry. Something has gone wrong, and she's gotten angry, and you have to appease her. And the way you appease her is you give her a bottle of gin and tea leaves, the TI, the taro plant leaves. And so, while the eruption was going on, they got a Hawaiian priestess to go up, and she went up to the edge of the volcano crater in the lava flow and threw in a bottle of gin and some tea leaves. And sure enough, the eruption or the lava flow got down to within a couple hundred yards of the subdivision and then turned and diverted and stopped.
Wow.
And so, and then a couple of years later, there was another lava flow and another eruption, and this time it was on an area, a subdivision that had been built up on a piece of ground that the Hawaiians considered sacred, and there was some sort of sacred meaning to this particular piece of ground. And so they went to the priestess again, and she said, "No, I'm not going to do that, because this is your punishment for building on that ground." And sure enough, the lava flow came down and wiped out the subdivision. I'm not gonna say I completely buy into the old Hawaiian religions and everything like that, but as my mother used to say, you ignore that stuff at your peril. I mean, there's a long history of those things, and they wouldn't have done them if they hadn't worked. And so
precisely.
Pay attention.
I love that quote.
So Clay, thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate you having you on this episode with us. Just so everybody knows, Clay is also an esteemed colleague of ours on our systems consulting team here at Quest. We'll get into sort of his background and sort of his interest, but as a former DBA, right? As a former practitioner, is there any relevance when it comes to superstitions or even resolutions when it comes to being a practitioner? I'm just curious, right? Because I'm thinking, right, ignore your perils. Or are you doing this? Are you doing the same sort of thing before an upgrade, or perhaps even a migration?
Well, not so much that, but little things like trying to be prepared all the time. I was in search and rescue for a number of years in the command or base side of search and rescue, doing mapping and documentation and logging and all those kind of things. And we had some really hard and fast rules about, for example, enforcing rest. Right? You get into these multi-day missions or multi-day things going on, and people get burned out and tired, and then it's go home, get some sleep. You can't keep going, even though you want to keep going forever. You really can't. And the human body and human mind have limits, and also things like checklists. Make checklists for everything. There's a real good book a doctor wrote called The Checklist Manifesto. And there's a reason airline pilots and doctors and people like that all have checklists they go through that are written down or proceduralized, or in the case of pilots, they're on the computer screens they use, so they actually have to tap a button and say, yeah, we did this, we did that,
Right.
Put your hand on the button and things like that. And I've always tried to apply those things to my work as a DBA or my work in systems, to make sure that the systems we provide are reliable and effective and up and running at all times. And so there's a lot of similarity and I guess just common sense. Like another saying that goes around is, proper prior planning prevents poor performance. So 5 P's, right?
That's right. Yep. And Clay, if I recall, you and I started right around the same time at Quest back in 2012, and we were within a couple months of each other, if I recall. So, can you share with us a little bit how did your previous life and your previous work experience bring you to Quest?
Well, I've always been, well, not always, but very early in my career, I kind of branched off into the data business and got involved with databases and DBA work. And one of the other things I've always tried to do is, I really like doing a lot of varied and a lot of different things. I've got a very broad range of interests and things, and in fact, I tend to get distracted. I think maybe I had ADD and was never diagnosed with it, because I'm always, oh, that's something cool. I want to learn more about that, and I'll go
Squirrel.
off on exactly. I'll go off on a tangent, but one of the, in fact, one interview question, one of my bosses asked me, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I said, well, I want to work myself out of a job. I don't want to be doing the same, mundane, repetitive things that I probably have to do to start out and build databases and so on. A lot of stuff can be automated, right? So automate everything you can, obviously. And so that kind of led to tools, and we looked at tools at various companies, and Quest kept coming up as a tool vendor, and looking at the different things that were going on in terms of monitoring tools and database management tools and so on. And of course, Toad and all the other great products that Quest has. And I found I was pitching those inside one company, and kind of one at a time, right? I go to a company and I'd say, oh, we need tools. Okay, well, let's look at Quest and evaluate Quest. And we did a different number of bake-offs at different companies, and 9 times out of 10, Quest came up the winner. And so I finally, when my last
that was a little shameless plug there. I like that, Clay.
I see what you did there, Clay. Great job.
Yeah, but my last gig, when I got done with that, and it's time to look for something new, and I said, well, rather than just pitching Quest and tools and helping one company at a time, how about if I ask Quest if they need somebody like me who can help lots of companies? So here I am.
Tell us a little bit about what you may have been doing with SharePlex and with Replication before you came to Quest, if at all.
Well, yeah, one of the things that I worked at a large financial institution, and we had regulators everywhere. They're almost as regular. Next thing to being a doctor or medical regulation is financial institutions, right? Mm-hmm. Particularly in the climate now. And the institution I was at was actually part of that. It was WAMU. I'll go ahead and say, I was at WAMU, and I rode WAMU down all the way into the crash and the acquisition and so on. And so very highly regulated. And one of the regulations was that you have to have a DR plan and you have to have disaster recovery. And since we were located in Seattle, our DR system couldn't be located in Seattle. So we'd acquired a bank in Texas and had a big data center in Texas. And so we said, okay, well, let's set up our disaster site in Texas. And we started out with just, tape backups, right? Shipping tapes between, this is many years ago, of course, but shipping tapes between Seattle and Texas. And that didn't work so well. And we said, oh, okay, that's kind of slow and awkward. And we wind up with data that's 3 days old by the time it gets to Texas. So, we'll lose 3 days worth of transactions or data right away if we have to fail over. And so that didn't work. So we said, let's look at something else. And at that time, this is back in the early 90s, replication was just starting, right? Just coming into into fruition. People were talking about doing it. And in fact, WAMU actually had Golden Gate before they got bought by Oracle as a replication tool, sucking data out of ATMs and putting them into our big mainframe system. So Golden Gate did that, and we looked and we asked Golden Gate, hey, can you do anything with Oracle to Oracle? And they said, well, no. And we looked, and there was Quest, and there was SharePlex, and we said, oh, well, let's take a look at that. And we took a look at it and decided it would pretty well meet our needs, and so we installed it, and sure enough, it did meet our needs, and we used that, so we had pretty much instantaneous failover or pretty seamless failover. We allowed for a little bit of recovery time because when you're doing replication, you can always come up with a scenario where you're going to lose a little bit of data, but the idea is to minimize that and make that as small as possible. We did that, so we set up SharePlex, and we'd come in the middle of the night on a Sunday at the end of a quarter, beginning of a quarter, and we'd stop all our systems for a few seconds and move all the users over from Seattle to Dallas, and then bring up the Dallas system and bring the users up there, and they run in Dallas for a quarter, and then they come back and run in Seattle the next quarter, and so on. And we use that to demonstrate to the regulators that we really do have a DR plan, and we can really use it and fail over because look, we're doing it every quarter. And so that worked out pretty well. And I've used that as an example in a lot of cases where I talk to customers about SharePlex. And it's actually it was really easy to set up. Not easy to set up really, but once it got set up, it was very easy to maintain and to run. So
perhaps you could just take a step back for just the benefit of the audience. What is replication? How would you best define replication? You had mentioned it specifically proving the DR use case there. In sort of the slant and the sort of the overarching initiative that was there for compliance, right? Yeah. But how would you define replication to our audience? Specifically with databases in mind and data centers.
Database replication in general is taking two copies of your data and keeping them in sync, making the source copy, if you will, to use SharePlex terms, the source and the target copies of the data look the same and stay the same at all times, and you use replication to do that. And there's different kind of flavors of replication. You can, replicate data at the file system where you're taking file system blocks and so on and moving them from server A to server B or point A to point B, or you can do it at the logical level, which is where SharePlex does it, where we look at the database and see what changed, and then take those changes and apply them to the target database. So that's SharePlex is what we would call logical replication.
Let me ask you. So you described earlier the disaster recovery use case. Can you share two or three other primary use cases that you find data replication a critical consideration?
Oh yeah. There are lots of them. Actually, we have 9 or 10 different use cases we talk about all the time. But then another big one is, in fact, the first one that SharePlex was really built for was not DR, but for reporting, report offloading. You got a big system, big OLTP system, and it's doing, a couple hundred or a couple thousand transactions a second against some very nice, well-tuned small tables, or, big tables, but with good indexes and so on. And then along comes somebody and it says, doing an analyst, and says, I want to know how many widgets we sold in each store by store for the last 10 years, right? And so they launched the, select star from 3 different tables where a bunch of conditions are true and so on. And all of a sudden, performance on your system grinds to a halt, right? Because this query, what we call a query from hell, has, blown all your memory and your indexes and so on out of the water, and now things are slow for everybody, right? So an order taker comes in and wants to take an order, or a customer logs into your system and wants to take an order, and it takes 5 minutes to bring back a record, right? That's unacceptable, right? So how do you solve that? Well, there are lots of ways to solve it. You can buy bigger hardware, buy more hardware, or you can take that query that was running against that production database and move it to run it against the copy of the production database, a replica of the production database. And so that's what happens. And in fact, at WAMU, we did that. We started with a DR use case. We said, we need DR, we need a long distance, so we have to use something like SharePlex. We can't use rack or something like that because it can't be local to even the same city, so it's got to be distant. But then we looked at it and we said, hey, when we're running in Seattle, we've got this data here sitting here in Dallas that's got all the same data, and it's reasonably up to date. It's a couple of minutes behind, but it's reasonably up to date. Why can't we do our big reporting off the data center in Dallas? So we started doing that, and lo and behold, we got back about 30% of our capacity on our LTP system by doing that. We actually put off a hardware upgrade for a couple of years. We were planning on doing a hardware upgrade, and we said, well, before we do the hardware upgrade, let's let's do some offloading. And we did that and moved it over. So that, saved us a lot of money, actually, by kind of having that DR database do double duty. But that was another great use case for SharePlex. Another one we run into quite a bit is migrations, upgrades, and patches, right? You want to migrate your database from Oracle 11 to Oracle 19, or maybe you've decided you want to move off of AIX hardware to Linux hardware, to commodity hardware. Well, the traditional way you do that would be take your system down, because you need a consistent copy of your system. You don't want people changing it while you're making a copy. You bring it up in Linux environment, which might take, you're going to use export import, so that might take, in some cases days, right? So during that time, your users are out of business. They're not doing anything, because you can't make changes and not have those changes appear in your new environment. So you bring your new environment up, and you cross your fingers, hope it works, and move everyone over there to it. And if it didn't work, now you've got a bigger problem, because you've got data that was entered in the new system, and how do you get that data back to the old system? You have to fall back to your old system. Well, with SharePlex, we can solve that problem and let you do your migration with almost no downtime, no perceptible downtime to your users, and with the ability to fail back if you need to and keep the transactions moving when you fail back. And the way we do that is, before you make your copy, you start SharePlex on your source system, sucking the data out and sucking all the changes out, and just storing them. Don't do anything with them, just store them and keep them available. You make your copy to a consistent point in the database, an SCN, in Oracle's case, system change number, and then you restore that copy to your new database, and you tell SharePlex, hey, SharePlex, take those transactions you saved and apply them to the new database, and oh, by the way, keep applying transactions in the new database. So now all of a sudden you're caught up. You get an old copy and a new copy of your database. They're in sync. They look identical. One's running on AIX, one's running on Linux. And instead of having to do a big, cut over and take a lot of downtime, you just shut your two systems down for 4 or 5 minutes, move your users over to the new environment, and they're up and running in the new environment. At the same time, we can take that new environment, we can capture the transactions the users put in there, so that, if a day after you move over or a week after you move over to your new environment, you discover, well, we're getting really bad performance. There's something happening, or maybe the hardware fails, or we didn't take something into consideration where we got to fail back. We got to go back to our old AX environment. You take the transactions we captured from your new environment, apply them to your old environment, and you're back up and running again. No data loss. So we can take the risk out of a migration by doing that. That's a big use case for us.
I was in the mindset that a company would choose to invest in something like SharePlex for a particular reason, but you just gave several compelling use cases that I imagine are pretty popular, and like you said, several at a particular company. So you could be choosing to go with a solution like SharePlex for several of these use cases, not just one.
Exactly, and in some cases it almost comes along kind of free. I mean, in the case of WAMU, we had DR up and running, right? So now we've got two systems. We've already invested in the hardware and the software and all that for keeping the two systems up and running. We didn't have to license a new version of SharePlex to do that because it's already there. Now, if you wanted to have separate DR system and a reporting system, then you might need to license one copy of SharePlex to do that. But again, the incremental investment is very small, and you already know how to use it. It's the same tool, right? So kind of a multi-purpose tool, a Swiss Army knife, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just sort of taking a tangent here, but sort of relating it to this whole topic around replication. The DBA's role has changed over the years. It's not just Oracle that DBAs are dealing with nowadays. So perhaps you can talk to us about how things have changed from your perspective when you look at the landscape of data, where we're seeing the shifting of paradigms taking place where data resides. What are your thoughts on sort of the future of how replication is going to be managed and sort of how that dovetails to how the DBA's role has transformed over the years?
Well, yeah, the DBA's role has changed considerably. And back when I started being a DBA, we were concerned a lot with physical stuff, right? Eking out the highest possible level of performance from the database. And the data was important, obviously. We wouldn't be storing it if it wasn't. But data was the kind of the end product. A lot of the mundane day-to-day management stuff that the DBAs used to do in terms of performance, and so lots of tools and the proliferation of automation has moved the DBA's job. But in a way, I think it's great, because what that lets the DBA do is focus on the content of the data, right? Why is this data important to the business? Replication is a huge way to make that happen.
So thanks for your time. This has been a very interesting discussion here, Clay. I'd certainly like to replicate this one down the road at some point. So Clay, really, thank you so much for joining us today. We would love to have you back at some point in the future to maybe talk about some of our other solutions and technologies.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. This has been fun. This is great.
Yes, thank you, Clay.
Yeah, and everybody have a happy new year, and thanks for joining us on this Rabbit podcast. Please don't forget to like and subscribe.